The first thing to understand about medieval teeth is that they were in trouble. We have this idea that because they didn't eat much sugar, their teeth must have been great. And that's partly true. Widespread sugary cavities like we see today weren't the main problem for most people. The real enemy was wear and tear. Their diet was tough, really tough. Bread was the staple food for almost everyone, from a peasant to a king. But it wasn't the soft, fluffy bread we know. It was dense, coarse, and full of grit. The stone grinding wheels used to make flour would chip away over time. Tiny bits of stone and sand ended up in the dough. So every bite of bread was like taking fine grit sandpaper to your teeth. Day after day, year after year, this constant grinding wore the enamel right down. They were literally chewing rocks with every meal. This process is called attrition. You can see it clearly on medieval skulls. The tops of the teeth are often worn completely flat, with a softer dentin underneath exposed. Once the dentin is exposed, decay can happen much faster. Food gets trapped in the pits and grooves. And while they didn't have refined sugar, they had honey. Honey is sticky and full of natural sugars. It could get into those worn down spots and cause serious problems. Then there was the lack of any real dental care. There were no dentists, there was no toothpaste, no toothbrushes, no floss. Some people might have rubbed their teeth with a cloth, maybe with some salt or powdered herbs. But this was inconsistent and not very effective. It was more about freshening the breath than preventing decay. So if a problem started, it just got worse. A small cavity would grow, it would reach the nerve. The pain would be immense. We've all had a toothache. Now imagine that with no painkillers, no antibiotics, and no dentist to fix it. The infection could spread from the tooth down into the jawbone. This created an abscess, a pocket of pus that would cause the face to swell up. The pain would be constant and agonizing. What could you do about it? Your options were grim. You could let it run its course and hope you survived. Many people didn't. Dental infections could easily lead to sepsis, a total body infection that was a death sentence. Or you could seek out someone to pull the tooth. The person you went to see was usually the local barber-surgeon. These were the jacks of all trades for medieval medicine. They could give you a haircut, let your blood, set a broken bone, and pull a tooth. They didn't have anesthetics. They might give you a lot of alcohol to drink, but that was it. Their tools were crude, looking more like pliers from a blacksmith shop. They would stick this tool in your mouth, grab the tooth, and pull. Sometimes it came out clean. More often the tooth would shatter, leaving the infected root behind. Or they might break a piece of your jawbone in the process. The whole thing was brutal and dangerous. People put off having a tooth pulled until the pain was so bad they couldn't stand it anymore. They rightly feared the cure as much as the disease, so you have a population where most people are missing teeth. Not just one or two. By the time someone reached middle age, it was common to have large gaps in their smile. Losing front teeth affected how you looked and spoke. Losing back teeth made it even harder to chew that already tough food. It was a sign of aging, of poverty, and of poor health. This created a need, a desire. If you were wealthy, if you were a noble or a rich merchant, you cared about your appearance. You wanted to look healthy and powerful. A mouthful of gaps didn't project that image. You also wanted to be able to eat without pain or difficulty. So the question arose, even back then, could a lost tooth be replaced? This fundamental problem, this world of dental misery, is where the story of fake teeth begins. It wasn't about getting a Hollywood smile. It was about trying to reclaim a little bit of function and dignity in a world that was very hard on the human body. So you've lost a tooth, or several. The pain is gone, but now there's a gap. If you're a farmer, you probably just lived with it. But if you had money and status, you started looking for a solution. The idea of replacing teeth wasn't new. The ancient civilizations like the Etruscans and Romans had already experimented with it. But a lot of that knowledge was lost after the fall of Rome. During the Middle Ages, people had to rediscover and reinvent these techniques. The first and most persistent myth we need to get out of the way is the idea of wooden teeth. We hear stories about George Washington having wooden dentures, and we assume it was a common practice for centuries. But it's not true. Wood is a terrible material for teeth. Think about it, it's porous. It would absorb saliva and everything you ate or drank. It would stain immediately. It would start to rot and splinter. It would taste awful. Archaeologists have never found a surviving set of wooden dentures from this period. The material just doesn't make sense. So what did they use? They turned to materials that were hard, could be carved, and looked something like real teeth. The most common materials were animal bone and ivory. Bone was cheaper and more readily available. People would use ox bone or horse bone. A craftsman would take a piece of bone and carefully carve it into the shape of a tooth. It was a difficult, painstaking process. The finished product would then be fitted into the gap. Ivory was the high-end option. It was more durable than bone and looked more like real enamel. The best kind was hippopotamus ivory. It was incredibly dense and hard, making it ideal for carving. And it also didn't stain as easily as bone. Elephant and walrus ivory were also used. But getting ivory was expensive. It had to be imported, sometimes from very far away. Only the very wealthy could afford an ivory tooth, but the most sought-after material for a false tooth was another human tooth. It sounds gruesome to us, but it made perfect sense to them. It was the right shape, the right color, and the right size. It was the perfect replacement. The question was, where did you get them? This led to a grim trade. The teeth of the dead were a valuable commodity. Grave robbers would sometimes pry teeth from skulls. Battlefields were another major source. After a battle, scavengers would descend on the field to strip the bodies of anything valuable, and that included teeth. Young soldiers often had strong, healthy teeth, which made them prime targets. But the most common source was the living poor. If you were desperate for money, you could sell your teeth. Someone would pay you a small sum, and then a barber surgeon would yank out one of your healthy incisors. It was a painful and disfiguring transaction, but for someone facing starvation, it might have seemed like the only choice. These harvested teeth were then cleaned and sold to a craftsman who would use them to create a prosthetic for a wealthy client. Now you have a replacement tooth made of bone, ivory, or a real human tooth. How do you get it to stay in the mouth? The methods were simple and often quite fragile. For a single tooth, the most common technique was to drill small holes through the false tooth and the neighboring healthy teeth. Then, a piece of wire or strong thread would be laced through the holes, tying the false tooth into place. The gold wire was the preferred material for the rich. It was strong, it didn't rust, and it showed off your wealth. Less affluent people might use silver wire or even just waxed linen or silk thread. This method was not very secure. The wire could loosen, the thread could rot and break. And drilling holes in healthy teeth was a terrible idea. It weakened them and created a new place for decay to start. But it was the best they could do. These early fake teeth were not very functional. They were mostly for show. You couldn't really chew with a single tooth tied in with a piece of wire. Biting into an apple could easily dislodge it. Their main purpose was to fill a gap in a smile, to restore a person's appearance, to allow them to speak without a lisp. It was about looking whole again. The idea of a full set of functional dentures was still centuries away. These were small, individual solutions to a very big problem. They were fragile, expensive, and a constant hassle. But for the person who had one, it was better than nothing. A single false tooth tied in with wire was one thing. But what if you lost several teeth in a row? This required a more complex solution. It led to the creation of what we would now call a dental bridge. This wasn't something your local barber could whip up. It required a true artist, someone with immense skill in carving and metalwork. Usually, this was a goldsmith or a master ivory carver. The process was long and expensive. A wealthy client, maybe a duchess or a powerful merchant, would commission the work. The craftsman would start by taking a look at the person's mouth. They had no molds or x-rays. Everything was done by eye and by feel. They would have to judge the size of the gap and the condition of the remaining teeth. The goal was to create a single block of false teeth that could be anchored to the healthy teeth on either side of the gap. The craftsman would select a piece of material, usually a large block of hippo ivory or bone. Then they would begin to carve. This was meticulous work. They had to carve out the individual shapes of the missing teeth. They had to shape the back of the block so it would sit somewhat comfortably against the gums. The whole piece had to be shaped and sized to fit the gap perfectly. Too big and it wouldn't go in. Too small and it would be loose. It was a process of trial and error, carving a bit, then trying it in the mouth, then carving a bit more. Sometimes, instead of carving the teeth from one solid block, they would use real human teeth. They would take a base plate carved from ivory and then drill holes in it. Then they would take harvested human teeth and fix them into the base plate using small pegs or rivets made of metal. This gave a more realistic appearance, but it was even more complex and expensive to make. These were the absolute top-of-the-line dental prosthetics of the time. Once the block of teeth was carved, it had to be attached. This was the most critical and difficult part. The most common method was to use metal bands or wires. The goldsmith would forge thin, flat bands of gold or silver. These bands would be fitted around the healthy anchor teeth on either side of the gap. The bridge, the block of false teeth, was then soldered or riveted to these bands. The whole contraption would then be carefully cemented into place. The cement was often a mixture of resins and other sticky substances which didn't last very long. Imagine what this felt like in your mouth. It would have been heavy and bulky. It wouldn't have fit perfectly against the gums, leaving spaces for food to get trapped. And it put a huge amount of strain on the anchor teeth. The constant pressure and pulling from the bands would loosen the healthy teeth over time. And it was nearly impossible to clean under the bridge or around the bands. This meant that the anchor teeth, the very foundation of the whole structure, were at a huge risk of decay. A device meant to solve a dental problem often ended up creating new ones. Functionality was still a major issue. While these bridges were more stable than a single tied-in tooth, they were not strong. Chewing tough food was risky. The bridge could break, or worse, it could break one of the anchor teeth. People with these devices likely had to stick to softer foods, so, like the simpler solutions, these were still primarily cosmetic. They were about maintaining social standing. At a royal court, your appearance was everything. A full smile, even a fake one, projected an image of youth, health, and wealth. It was a status symbol, a piece of jewelry you wore inside your mouth. The cost was astronomical. The price of the ivory, the gold, and especially the craftsman's time put these devices far out of reach for anyone but the super rich. A single dental bridge could cost more than a farmer might earn in his entire lifetime. They were so valuable that they were sometimes listed in wills, passed down from one person to another. These contraptions were a testament to human ingenuity and vanity. They were uncomfortable, unhealthy, and fragile. But they represented a huge leap forward. They showed a growing understanding of mechanics and materials. They were the first real attempts to replace not just one tooth, but a part of the mouth structure. They were far from perfect, but for a wealthy medieval person, they were a way to fight back against the decay and damage that time and a rough life inflicted on their bodies. So how do we know all of this? It's one thing to talk about what was possible, but it's another to prove it. The evidence for medieval false teeth comes from a few different places: archaeological finds, medical texts from the period, and personal writings or art. Each one gives us a piece of the puzzle. Archaeological evidence is the most direct proof, but it's also very rare. The materials used to make false teeth, like bone, ivory, and thread, are organic. They decay over time, just like a human body. Metal wires might survive, but they're small and can be easily lost or misinterpreted. For a dental prosthetic to survive for centuries, it needs to be in a very specific, protected environment. Despite this, some amazing examples have been found. In the 1990s, archaeologists in Tuscany, Italy, excavated a site containing graves from the late 14th to the early 17th century. In one grave, they found the remains of several wealthy women. One of these women had a remarkable dental appliance. It consisted of 5 human teeth 3 incisors and 2 canines bound together with a gold band. The band had been cleverly fitted into slots cut into the back of the teeth. This device was designed to fill a gap in her lower jaw. It shows that the techniques we've discussed were very real. They were using real human teeth and precious metals to create sophisticated bridges. Other, earlier finds show the long history of this practice. Roman-era graves have revealed similar devices, showing that the idea was not new to the Middle Ages. But the medieval period saw a resurgence and refinement of these skills, particularly among craftsmen who worked with the wealthy. Written records provide another crucial window into this world. While dentistry was not a formal profession, some highly educated physicians and surgeons wrote about it. One of the most famous was a French surgeon named Guy de Chauliac. In the mid-14th century, he wrote a massive surgical text called the Chirurgia Magna. It became the standard textbook for surgeons for the next 200 years. In his book, de Chauliac dedicated a section to the teeth. He described how to clean teeth, how to treat cavities, and how to perform extraction. And he also talked about replacing lost teeth. He wrote about making artificial teeth from the bone of an ox or from ivory. He even gave instructions on how to fasten them in place using gold or silver wire. He warned that these false teeth were mostly for adornment and not for chewing, confirming that their function was primarily cosmetic. This text is incredibly important because it's not a story or a rumor. It's a medical professional of the time describing a procedure he knew about. Personal letters and documents can also offer clues, though they are often less direct. A wealthy person might complain in a letter about the cost of having a smith fix their teeth. Or a household account book might show a payment to a goldsmith for dental work. These are small fragments, but they help build a picture of who was getting this work done and who was doing it. The art from the period is a bit trickier to use as evidence. In medieval and Renaissance portraits, people almost never smile with their teeth showing. This was partly a matter of social convention. A wide grin was considered unsophisticated. But it was also a practical matter. Most people, even the rich people being painted, had terrible teeth. They had gaps, stains, and crooked teeth, so they kept their mouths closed. The absence of smiles in art is, in its own way, evidence of the widespread dental problems. Occasionally, you might see a hint of something. A person's jawline might look a little unnatural, or their lips might be held in a way that suggests they are hiding something or wearing a bulky appliance. But it's very rare to see a clear depiction of a false tooth in a painting. When you put all this evidence together, the rare archaeological finds, the detailed medical texts, and the hints from art and personal records, a clear picture emerges. Fake teeth in the Middle Ages were not a myth. They were real. They were sophisticated for their time. But they were also extremely rare, a luxury item reserved for the absolute richest members of society. They were a secret that people carried in their mouths, a testament to the high price of a perfect smile in an imperfect world. Why go through all this trouble? Why spend a fortune on a fragile, uncomfortable device that might even damage your other teeth? The answer goes beyond just wanting to chew better. The meaning of teeth, and the lack of them, was deeply tied to social identity in the medieval world. Having fake teeth was about much more than just filling a hole. First and foremost, it was about fighting the signs of aging. In a time with no modern medicine, your physical body was a clear indicator of your age and health. Losing your teeth was one of the most visible signs that you were getting old. Your face would change shape. Without the support of teeth, your cheeks and lips would sink inward, giving you a sunken, aged look. It was a physical marker of decline. For the powerful, for kings and queens and nobles whose authority rested on an image of vitality, this was a serious problem. A set of false teeth, however imperfect, could help hold the shape of the face. It was a way to literally put on a younger face to project an image of strength and vigor when your body was starting to fail. This appearance was also directly linked to social status. The wealthy were expected to look different from the poor. They wore finer clothes, ate richer food, and lived in better homes. Their bodies were supposed to reflect their elevated position. A mouthful of gaps was a sign of a hard life, of poverty, of a coarse diet. It was the look of a peasant. For a member of the elite, having a smile that looked like a commoner's was a social embarrassment. A dental prosthetic crafted from ivory and gold was the ultimate status symbol. It wasn't just a medical device, it was a piece of custom jewelry. It silently announced to everyone that you had so much money you could afford to rebuild your own body. There was a practical element to it as well, related to speech. Try talking for a day without your front teeth. You'll find that certain sounds, especially and they become very difficult to pronounce clearly. You develop a lisp. For someone who had to command armies, negotiate treaties, or hold court, speaking clearly was essential. A lisp could undermine your authority and make you sound weak or foolish. False teeth could restore a person's ability to speak properly, helping them maintain their presence and command. And finally, there's the simple, timeless human desire to feel good about oneself. Nobody likes having a gap in their smile. It makes you self-conscious. You hide your mouth when you talk or laugh. This feeling is not a modern invention. A medieval lord or lady would have felt that same insecurity. They wanted to feel attractive, to be able to interact with their peers without feeling ashamed of their appearance. This desire for personal confidence, for a sense of normalcy and wholeness, was a powerful motivator. So, when we look at a medieval dental bridge, we shouldn't see it as just a crude attempt at dentistry. We should see it for what it was: a complex social object. It was a weapon against aging. It was a badge of wealth. It was a tool for communication, and it was a comfort for the insecure. The story of medieval false teeth tells us that people have always been willing to go to great lengths and endure significant pain and expense to control how the world sees them. The technology has changed dramatically. We now have titanium implants and porcelain crowns. The procedures are sterile and painless, but the fundamental human drive behind it all is exactly the same. It's the desire to present a complete, healthy, and confident self to the world. The wealthy of the Middle Ages, with their wired-in bone and ivory teeth, were simply the pioneers in this long and ongoing quest. They showed that even in a world defined by hardship and decay, the human spirit will always find a way to rebuild.